3 in the morning. You wake up, you can't move, and something is standing at the foot of your bed. You can't see its face clearly. You only know with a certainty colder than fear itself that it is there, that it is watching you. Your body is locked down against the mattress as though someone poured concrete into every vein. You want to scream, nothing comes out. You want to run, you can't twitch a single finger. And that shape simply stands there, patient, at the end of the bed. You are not alone in this. Tonight, millions of people across the planet will see exactly this. A figure in the corner of the room, a weight crushing down on the chest, heavy enough that breathing becomes impossible. A vague shape gliding past the edge of vision, gone the moment they turn their head. In the morning, a few of them will tell someone and be waved off with a shrug. The rest will tell no one. They'll fold it up and keep it inside, and every night before they kill the light, they'll glance at that one corner of the room. You have already been one of them. Or one day, you will be. So what is that thing? And why has it shadowed humanity from the dawn of history to this very night? Across every civilization, every religion, every ocean. This is what makes it impossible to brush off as cheap superstition. In the wealthiest, most modern nations on Earth, drowning in electric light and satellites and smartphones, roughly 4 out of every 10 adults still believe the souls of the dead can come back. The share who believe in demons runs a little higher. And here is the number that lifts the hair off your neck. 1 in 5 people insist they don't merely believe they've met one, face to face, seen it, heard it, felt a hand that belonged to no one. A fifth of humanity. That is not a handful of the unwell. That is billions of people, scattered across every continent. And if it is all imagination, then explain this one thing to me. Why would human beings who'd never met, separated by thousands of miles in thousands of years, independently dream up almost the very same monster? To see it, we have to take a trip around the world. And the further we go, the more you'll notice a repetition that crawls under the skin. Begin in Japan. There, the classic ghost is the yurei, a woman with long black hair hanging down to half cover her face, wrapped in the white robe of the dead, drifting in the air. For by legend, the yurei has no feet. But what haunts about the yurei is not how it looks. It is why it stays. People believe the yurei is the soul of one who died, yet could not move on because the funeral rites were left unfinished, or because some grudge, some unsettled business, binds it to this world. It does not return to scare you. It returns because it cannot leave. The Japanese ghost is more sorrowful than savage. And that sorrow, in its own quiet way, is more frightening than rage. Cross to the far side of the earth, to Latin America, where on dark nights a weeping is said to rise from the riverbanks. They call her La Llorona, the weeping woman. She lost her own children by the water, and now she wanders forever along the rivers and the canals, crying as she searches for the children she will never find again. Parents warn their kids to keep away from the river after dark, lest they hear her cry and be carried off. Hold on to 3 details here. A mother, the loss of her children, bound to water. We will meet her again, somewhere you would never expect. Onward to India, where ghosts are not gentle. The Chudayal is a woman, beautiful enough to enchant when seen from the front, but the instant she turns her back, you see that both of her feet are mounted backward. She haunts the lonely roads, beneath the old trees, at the deepest hour of night, and by many tellings, she preys on men walking alone. The same template again. A woman, an empty road, a solitary figure in the dark. Down into Southeast Asia, we meet the Pontianak, the soul of a woman who died in childbirth, who appears in the shape of a beauty and then sheds that shape to hunt. When she draws near, they say, the air carries the scent of frangipani, sweet in a way that feels wrong. And to this day, many families will not leave laundry hanging out overnight, for fear the smell of the cloth will lure the Pontianak to the window. Once more, a woman, death in childbirth. Stay in the region a moment longer in Thailand, and you find Maynak perhaps the most beloved and most feared ghost in the country. She is the spirit of a woman who died in childbirth while her husband was away, and who refused to accept that she was dead. When he came home, she went on keeping house for him, cradling a child that no longer breathed, until the day he glimpsed her reaching for something with an arm stretched impossibly long, and understood what he had been living with. Look at the pattern hardening now. A woman, childbirth, a death that will not stay dead. The same wound, stitched into yet another culture that never spoke to the others. In the Muslim world, there are the jinn, not the souls of the dead, but a separate race entirely, made from smokeless fire, living in parallel with humankind in a world the naked eye cannot see. For centuries, when a person suddenly fell ill for no clear reason or abruptly behaved as though they had become someone else, the jinn were the explanation. And the West has its translucent shapes haunting the old castles and the abandoned mansions. Footsteps in an empty hall. A door that swings shut on its own. A cold that drops through a warm room without warning. Now, step back and look at the whole journey from above. These cultures never sat down together. The ancient Japanese and the ancient Mexicans never held a council to agree on what a ghost should look like. And yet the same shapes keep returning like a curse. The long-haired woman, the mother who lost her children, death in childbirth, the figure on the empty road at midnight, the dead with unfinished business who cannot rest. An entire species, split into thousands of tribes with no contact between them, all drew nearly the same monster. Here, you have two roads to choose from. The first, the one most of human history has taken, leads to the conclusion. They are alike because they are real. Out there, in the dark, there truly is something. And every culture is only describing the same beasts from a different angle. But there is a second road, and I'll warn you, it runs colder down the spine. Because if ghosts are real, then at least they are out there. You can lock the door. You can run. You can move house. The second road says the thing that makes every ghost is not out there at all. It is inside. It follows you into every room. You cannot lock it out because it lives right behind your own two eyes. So let's take the ghosts apart, one at a time, and see what is actually standing in the room. Begin with the most common ghost on the planet, the very figure at the foot of the bed at 3 in the morning that I told you about. That moment when you wake, unable to move, with the weight on your chest and the absolute certainty that someone is in the room, it has a name. Medicine calls it sleep paralysis, and roughly 1 in 5 people on Earth has tasted it at least once. The mechanism is both simple and a cruel joke the brain plays on its own owner. Every night, as you slide into dreaming, your brain does something extremely clever. It temporarily cuts the command line to your muscles, paralyzing almost your entire body. This is a survival shield. Without it, you would stand and act out every dream. Throwing punches at the wall, breaking into a run from pursuers who don't exist, hurting yourself in your sleep. Normally, the paralysis lifts at the exact instant you wake, a flawless handoff. But sometimes the timing slips. The conscious part of you boots up first, while the part that runs your body is still locked in sleep mode. You're awake. Your body is not. And here is the darkest stroke of genius. Your brain, half awake and half dreaming, registers that something is profoundly wrong. I can't move. The heart is hammering. The region, whose only job is to sound the alarm of fear, is screaming at full volume. And the brain, which can never tolerate a fear without a cause, immediately hunts for a culprit. If I am this terrified, there must be a threat. There must be someone here. So it conjures a figure, sets it in the darkest corner of the room, and turns the formless panic into an intruder of flesh and blood. It does not find the threat. It builds the threat. And the weight on the chest, your breathing muscles fall inside the paralyzed zone too. You are still breathing, but it becomes strangely heavy, effortful. The brain reads that tightness in the most concrete way it can imagine. Someone is pressing on my chest. Someone is sitting on me. Someone is closing a hand around my throat. Now comes the real gut punch. This experience is the same everywhere in the world. So identical it is practically stamped from a single mold. But each culture drapes a different name over the thing on the chest. The Japanese call it kanashibari, the sense of being bound fast by a vengeful spirit. In Newfoundland, it is the old hag, who climbs onto the sleeper's chest and steals the breath. In Brazil, it is the pisadera, an old woman who treads on those who sleep on their backs with a full stomach. In Mexico, they say it flatly. The dead one just climbed on top of me. In Nigeria, it is a female demon who attacks in the middle of sleep. And it goes deeper than a shared name for a shared feeling. When researchers gathered accounts of sleep paralysis from people in North America, Japan, Turkey, China, and beyond, the same handful of figures kept walking out of the dark. A shadowy man in a brimmed hat, standing in the doorway. A faceless, dark silhouette. An old woman crouched on the chest. People who had never met, who shared no books and no films, were describing the same intruder down to the hat on his head. That is not a spirit traveling the world. That is the human brain under one specific kind of stress, reaching into the same drawer and pulling out the same nightmare, because every one of us was issued the same drawer at birth. Do you see what is happening? The same glitch of the brain, the same weight on the chest, the same figure in the doorway. Dozens of names across dozens of cultures that never met. The demon did not crawl out of anyone's hell. It crawled out of a moment when the brains of all of us run in exactly the same way. The fear is real. The paralysis is real. The weight is 100% real. Only the demon was made by the very person lying there, in the dark workshop behind the skull. But sleep paralysis only strikes when you sleep. What about the figure that slides across the corner of the room while you are wide awake? That is the second ghost. And to understand it, we have to talk about a bizarre thing your brain is doing right now, this very second, without you having the slightest idea. Your brain is obsessed with the human face. Obsessed to the point of sickness. Be honest and admit it. You see faces in electrical outlets, in burnt toast, on the moon, in clouds. In two headlights in the grill of a car speeding towards you. You don't do it on purpose. You cannot make yourself stop. Show it 3 dots roughly arranged into a face, and your brain instantly shouts, "A face! Someone is there!" This phenomenon has a name, pareidolia, and it is not a funny little error. It is one of the sharpest skills your ancestors handed you, paid for in blood across millions of years. Go back to when humans still lived in the jungle, under the shadow of predators. Picture a bush rustling right in front of you in the failing light. There are only 2 possibilities. 1, it is the wind. 2, it is a leopard, crouched and waiting. And you have only 2 kinds of mistake to choose between. You can think there is a leopard when it was only the wind and bolt, foolishly, losing a few seconds and a little pride. Or you can think it was only the wind when there really was a leopard, and that mistake you are allowed to make exactly once in your life. For millions of years, evolution ran a cold selection. The jumpy ancestors, the ones who saw a threat where there was nothing, survived to pass on their genes. The calm ones, who shrugged and said, "It's probably just the wind," were eaten and erased from the bloodline. You are the descendant of the jumpy ones. Your brain is built to rather sound 1,000 false alarms than miss one real one. That is why you are still sitting here. So when you step into a dark room, and in the corner there is a coat slung over a chair, a coat rack, a dim heap of clothes. The face detection machine in your head, always set to its most sensitive setting, scans that dark mass, and does the one thing it was born to do. It finds a face. And worse, it does not stop there. Your brain does not merely recognize a face. It automatically reads the emotion on it. The shape in the corner does not just have a form. It has a gaze. It has intent. It is watching you. The lifeless coat has just been granted, by your own brain, a soul and a purpose. This is part of something deeper, something a few thinkers have called the belief engine. The human brain is, above all, a machine for finding patterns. And not only patterns, but agency behind them. It is not enough for us to notice that the grass moved. We need to know who moved it, and what they want. Faced with randomness, the brain refuses to accept mere chance. It reaches instead for a mind, an intention, a someone. A creak in an empty house is not wood contracting in the cold. It is footsteps. A cold draft is not a gap under a door. It is a presence passing through. We are wired to populate the dark with people, because for 100,000 years, assuming a person was there kept us alive far more often than it cost us. The ghost is the shadow this machinery throws on the wall. Those are ghosts born from inside you. Now, for 2 ghosts that come from the room itself, from things genuinely there in the air, things your senses are simply too coarse to catch. There was once a man who worked in a laboratory rumored to be haunted. The staff spoke of an oppressive atmosphere, a relentless feeling of being followed, chills down the spine. He himself one night saw a gray, blurred figure appear at the very edge of his vision. When he spun to face it, it vanished. A reasonable person would call that a ghost. But he was an engineer, so he went looking for the culprit. The next day, he happened to bring his fencing sword to work for repairs. When he clamped the blade into a vise, he froze. The blade was vibrating violently, as if plucked by an invisible hand. He traced it, and what he found was not a spirit, but a newly installed extractor fan, producing a sound at a frequency of around 19 hertz, too low for the human ear to hear. Sound below the threshold of hearing like that is called infrasound. And here is where physics meets biology in a way that makes the skin crawl. It turns out 19 hertz is roughly the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. Bathed in that wave, the man's eyes began to vibrate ever so slightly in their sockets. The vibration smeared the image at the edge of his vision, creating faint gray streaks that drifted at the corner of his eye, figures that were never there when he looked straight on. And that silent wave did not only shake his eyes, it shook his chest, made breathing hard, stirred a vague dread and a nameless terror. The room had no ghost. It was simply ringing a note so low that the body could hear it, but the ears could not. Later, that same infrasound was found in old cellars rumored to be haunted. The terror was real. It was just manufactured by a sound no one could hear. But if infrasound only makes you shudder, the next ghost can kill you. And it is the one I fear most in this whole story, because it is real in the most literal sense. More than a century ago, people recorded the case of a family who moved into an old house. Before long, the strange things began. The father felt that someone was always standing behind him, watching. He saw a strange woman, dressed in black, advancing toward him from the dining room. At night, the whole family heard footsteps on the floor above, the sound of furniture being dragged. Sometimes a mournful sigh drifting out of an empty room. One night, the husband woke with the feeling that someone was strangling him. The children grew paler and sicker, losing all interest in play. Even the houseplants withered and died. A perfectly haunted house. Until a relative grew suspicious and called someone in to inspect. The truth was colder than any ghost. The furnace was broken, and instead of pushing the exhaust out through the chimney, it was silently pumping carbon monoxide into every room. It is a gas with no color, no smell, no taste. You cannot see it, smell it, or taste it. It quietly takes the place of oxygen in your blood, slowly suffocating the brain. And what an oxygen-starved brain produces is exactly this: hallucinations, human figures, sounds, pressure on the chest, a causeless terror. They fixed the furnace, and instantly, the ghosts disappeared. With them went the headaches, the exhaustion, the sickness. The whole family had nearly died, and the thing killing them was not the woman in black. It was the air they breathed. This did not happen only once in the distant past. A modern writer once described the feeling of something evil trailing her through her small house. The sense of being watched, a whooshing sound past her ear, a weight on her chest, a dread that rose every night until she wept. She was convinced there was a demon in the house, until someone asked whether she had ever heard of carbon monoxide poisoning. The gas company came and found a leak large enough to have killed her had it gone on longer. The demon in her house was a faulty pipe. Remember this well, because it is a truth that may save your life one day. When a room suddenly leaves you feeling watched, tight in the chest, panicked for no reason, sometimes it is not a ghost warning you. It is the air killing you. The deadliest ghost has no shape. It has no smell. There is one more kind of haunting that seems to defy all of this. The one where the dead don't just appear, but act. Doors slam by themselves. Cups slide off shelves. Objects fly across a room. A force you cannot see throwing its weight around the house. This is the poltergeist, the noisy ghost, and it feels like the hardest one to explain away. Because surely a brain cannot make a real plate leave a real table. But here is the strange and very human pattern. In case after case that was actually investigated patiently, with cameras running and skeptics watching the flying objects traced back to a living hand. A child seeking attention in a household under strain, learning that a thrown cup brings the whole family running. A draft through an old house with warped frames. A floor settling, a pipe knocking in the walls, a tremor from a road outside. And again, an ordinary hoax that grew legs because everyone around it wanted to believe. The most famous poltergeist cases in history tend to share an awkward footnote. At some point, someone confessed. Not to lying about a ghost exactly, but to helping the ghost along. The noisy spirit, when you finally corner it, almost always turns out to have a heartbeat. And there is one more place these figures come from. The darkest and the least talked about. For a small number of people, the shapes and the voices do not arrive once on a bad night. They come every day. Certain conditions of the brain, severe psychiatric illness, particular kinds of dementia, damage or unusual activity in specific regions, can generate hallucinations so vivid and so constant that the person cannot tell them from the real world. They see strangers in the room who are not there. They hear voices commenting on their every move. They feel with total conviction a presence standing just behind them. To them, the haunting never ends. And it is worth saying plainly and without cruelty, these people are not weak, and they are not to be mocked. Their brains are doing, at full and relentless volume, the very same thing every other brain in this story did for a moment. The ghost is generated by the machine. It is just that for them, the machine never stops. And now, after all those lurking demons, we have to speak of the final ghost, the gentlest one. The ghosts so many of you have already met, and will never want to call a ghost at all. When someone you love dies, a strange thing often happens in the months and years that follow. You hear their voice calling your name from the next room. You glimpse them in a crowd at the market, so clearly you step forward to be sure. You feel the weight of them sit down on the edge of the bed. This is not rare, and it is not madness. Among those who have just lost a spouse, more than half go through exactly this, hearing, seeing, or sensing the one who is gone. And the gentlest part is that for most of them, it is not frightening. It is a comfort. It is not an illness. It is love that has not yet found a place to set itself down. When you live beside someone long enough, your brain builds a whole space reserved for them. Then they are gone, but the hollow remains, still waiting, and sometimes it fills itself in. The most common ghost in this world is not a white shape in a castle. It is a person you once loved returning for a moment, built out of your own longing. Now gather it all up and look clearly at what we have uncovered. The demon on the chest, your brain. The figure in the corner, your brain. The gray shape at the edge of your eyes shaking from a sound you can't hear. The woman in black, a leaking pipe. The dead love returning, your heart. Not a single one of those ghosts existed outside of a human being. Each was manufactured inside a skull, or by a machine on the fritz, or by something in the air, then projected onto the world as an image real enough to stop your breath. And here's the truth that centuries of ghost hunting have never overcome. In all those years, with all those cameras and recorders and meters, with millions of people certain they live beside spirits, not once, not a single time, has anyone captured a ghost in a way that can be repeated and verified. Not one photograph has survived real analysis. Not one recording has refused a mundane explanation. A thing that appears to exactly one nervous system, never to the camera sitting right beside it, never letting the stranger standing alongside see it too. That thing is not haunting the house. It is haunting the brain. And here's the part that should unsettle even the skeptic. Knowing all of this does not save you. You can understand sleep paralysis completely, can recite the mechanism word for word. And still, at 3 a.m, when your body locks and the shape appears at the foot of the bed, you will be just as terrified as someone who has never heard the word, because the fear does not wait for your reasoning. In the brain, the alarm fires first and fastest. The ancient circuitry that floods you with dread runs far ahead of the slow, modern part that explains things. By the time the rational voice says it's only paralysis, the primitive one has already emptied a bucket of ice down your spine. That is why ghosts survive in an age of science. Not because we still believe them in daylight, but because in the dark, belief was never the thing in charge. The body decides first and asks questions later. The ghost lives in that gap, the half second between the terror and the explanation. So what about the ghost stories themselves? If ghosts aren't real, why has humanity clung to them so stubbornly? Because the stories were never only about fear. They're tools. La Llorona weeps by the river, so children won't go near the water and drown. The Judeo lurks on the empty road, so the traveler learns to be careful in the dark. The fear of the dead forces the living to respect the dead, to hold a proper funeral, to remember their ancestors. A haunted ruin keeps the curious away from walls that might collapse on them. A cursed grave keeps thieves from digging where they shouldn't. For thousands of years, the ghost has been a teacher in a burial shroud, carving into lessons that plain reason is too weak to drive into the human heart. So we have to say it outright, clearly, and without flinching. The thing this whole story leads to. There is no reliable evidence, after careful scrutiny, that ghosts exist as the lingering souls of the dead. Every single ghost, dragged into the light and taken apart, dissolves into biology, into chemistry, into physics, into psychology, into grief, into need. Ghosts are real as experiences. They are not real as entities. They live in your nervous system, not in the walls. They're the price of a brain magnificent enough to see meaning and faces and souls everywhere, including in the places that are empty. And the story should end there, with relief. You should be able to turn off the light tonight and sleep, knowing the corner of the room is only a corner of the room. But I won't let you off that easily, because there is one last truth, colder than all the rest. The figure in the corner was a coat. The weight on your chest was your own body locking down. The woman in black was a furnace leaking gas. The voice of the departed was your own love echoing back. Notice one thing. In all those ghosts, not one ever actually harmed anyone. The coat never strangled you. The paralysis always dissolved after a few minutes. The ghost in the castle has never drawn a single drop of blood from a living person. People have, every day, on purpose. Throughout the length of history, human beings invented ghosts to explain horror. But the real horror, the kind that has killed millions, the kind that has made children tremble in corners, has never been the dead. It has always been the living. The coldest hand that ever fell on your shoulder in the dark did not belong to a ghost. It had body heat. It had a heartbeat. The most frightening thing that has ever stood in the doorway of a human bedroom, across every age and culture and ocean, has never been the one who died. It has been the one who was still breathing. So, I'll bring you back to where we started. 3 a.m. You wake up, you can't move, and something is standing at the foot of your bed. Now you know what it is. You know, it is your own brain, caught between sleep and waking, painting a guard at the door of your fear. It cannot touch you. It will be gone in minutes. It was never the thing to be afraid of. The thing to be afraid of, in the dark, was never the one who is gone. It was always the one who is still alive,